Sannidhanam Lakshmya Samalankita Vamabhagam Lakshmien Simham Sharanam Prabhadhye Krishnaya Vasudevaya Devaki Nandanaya Cha Nandagopa Kumaraya Govindaya Namo Namaha Namah Pannaganadhaya Vaikunta Vashavartine Shudasindhu Sudotpada Mandaraya Garutmate Srirange Shri Yatinduna Karunaya Asosyaditi Prekshitam Khyatashri Narasimhaharjamunite Padam Bhujendiram Tam Dakshandidayad Vishvagunaihi Bhandam Bhudagresaram Srimad Rangashatari Yoginrapatim Shayonidhim Samshaye Srimad Shri Rangavartvishwarahatariguna Samyamindrena Drishtam Nasthat Manam Sumhe Naraharishadajit Yoginetu Prasadat Ragyam Shri Rangakhari Prabhav Yadipadehe Rakya Prapta Lakshmi Simhasthanam Seve Yatindram Sakala Gunanidhim Viraragvekshatarim Shri Ranganatha Shadagopi Yatindra Drishtam Lakshmi Summa Shadajit Karuneka Patram Shrirangavira Raguraj Shadagopakrityam Vedanta Deshiki Yatindra Maham Prabhadhye Srimad Rangashatari Samyamivaral Labdagamantadvayam Srimad Virarahut Vahat Tihadajite Adharavindashrayam Srimad Vedavadam Sadeshikayatehe Karunya Vikshaspadam Seve Rangadhurina Shasanavasam Narayanam Yoginam Vedanta Deshikayatindra Katakshalabdha Vayanta Sara Manavadya Gunam Buddhargryam Narayanathyati Durya Kripabhishiktam Shri Ranganathyati Shekaramashrayamaha Shrimate Shri Lakshmi Smadhya Paduka Sevaka Shivan Chadago Shri Shri Rangashadago Vidindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha Shrimate Shivan Chadago Shri Virarag Chadago Vidindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha Shrimate Shivan Chadago Shri Vedanta Deshikayatindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha Shrimate Shri Lakshmi Smadhya Paduka Sevaka Shivan Chadago Shri Narayanatindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha Shrimate Shivan Chadago Shri Ranganatha Yatindra Mahadeshikaya Namaha. Thank you for turning your video on, Raghav. Welcome. I think we have a little over 11. I expect that other people will be joining as time progresses. So let's get started here. Today I want to start with a particular slokam. Vyasam Vasishtanaptaram Shakteh Pautrama Kalmasham Parasharatmajam Vande Shukatatam Taponidhim Vyasaya Vishnarupaya Vyasarupaya Vishnave Namo Vai Brahmanidaye Vasisthaya Namo Namaha. So what is this slokam? Where does this come? Does anybody know?
Vishnu Sahasranamam.
Vishnu Sahasranamam. And who does it talk about?
Well, the slokam is talking about Vyasar and his past and stuff. Like,
okay. Very good. So these are,
like Vyasam.
Yes, it starts with Vyasam Vasishta Naftaram, right? So we were talking about Chiranjeevis, and the slokam for Chiranjeevis goes Ashwattama Bhali Vyasa Hanumancha Vishanaha Kripah Parashuramascha Saptehe Chiranjeevinaha. So we finished the first two of the Chiranjeevis, which was Ashwattama and Mahabali, and the third in that context is Maharishi Veda Vyasa, right? So that's going to be the topic for today, is going to be on Veda Vyasa, and it's a pretty vast topic to talk about Maharishi Veda Vyasa. So we will try to capture as much information as possible within today's session, and if it even spills over a little bit, we might be even taking it out next class, but I think we should be able to cover it. It is going to be impossible to talk about all the aspects and contributions of Veda Vyasa and his lineage and his family and how he wrote all of his contributions and everything. But we'll try our best to go through the details and see how much ever we can cover. Okay. So having said that, the slokam Vyasam Vasishtanaftaram Shakteh Pautramakalmasham Parasharatmajam Vande Shukatatam Taponidhim. So Vyasa is supposed to be an incarnation of Mahavishnu himself. Vyasaya Vishnu Rupaya. Vyasa is a form of Vishnu. Vyasaya Vishnu Rupaya, Vyasa Rupaya Vishnave, and Vishnu is a form of Vyasa. Okay, Namo Vai Brahmanidaye. He is the embodiment of Parabrahma. Namo Vai Brahmanidaye. Vasishtaya Namo Namaha is the adulation that is given to Vasishta. Okay, Vasishta had a son called Shakti, right? Vasishta had a son called Shakti, and Shakti apparently died at a very young age. Per the scriptures, He was in a conflict with a king called Kalmashapada, and then he died at a very young age. But he had his wife, Shakti's wife, already had uh, uh, Shakti's son in her womb before the Rishi Shakti passed away. So that person who was, or the child that was in the womb of Shakti's wife, was none other than Parasharar himself. So when Parasharar was born, Shakti was not alive. So who brought up Parasharar? Vasishtar himself brought up Parasharar. Vasishtar was such a great rishi. Is one of the Sapta Rishis, right? Atri, Bhrigu, Kutsa, Vasishta, Gautama, Kashyapa, Angirasa, Risheha. Those are the 7 rishis: Atri, Bhrigu, Kutsar, Vasishtar, Gautama, Kashyapa, and Angirasa. So Atri, Bhrigu, Kutsa, Vasishta. Vasishta is the 4th of the Sapta Rishis, and he was also the Raja Rishi of. He was also the Raja Rishi of the Dasharathas, the Raghu dynasty, right? So Rama was actually married to Sita in the presence of Vasishtar. Vasishtar was key in convincing Dasharatha to send Rama along with Vishwamitra in order to kill Tataka. So Vasishtar appears in all of Ramayanam and as a part of Mahabharatam because he was the great-grandfather of Vyasar himself. Okay, so Vasishtar's son is Rishi Shakti, and Shakti's son is none other than Maharishi Parashara. Okay, Parasharar's son is Vyasar, and Vyasar's son is Shukabrahma. Apparently, Shukabrahma was an Avadhuta, and he did not marry or he did not have any children. So Vasishtar, Shakti, Parasharar, Vyasar, and Shukar. That is the lineage of Vyasar that we are going to see in a bit. Okay, what are the different names of Veda Vyasa? Does anybody know? Suparna, do you know? Can you be louder? Yes. So one of the names of Veda Vyasa is Krishna Dvaipayana. Krishna Dvaipayana Vyasa. So Krishna Dvaipayana, has anybody heard that name called Krishna Dvaipayana? It looks like Aparajita knows.
I heard there is a lot of
in Amar Chitra Kadai,
there's
Krishna meant because Veda Vyasa had very dark skin, and also he was born on an island, so that's Dvaipayana part.
Very nice, very nice. Who is that?
Hiranmayi.
Very nice, Hiranmayi. So Krishna Dvaipayana. Krishna means dark. You are right. Even though you read it from Amar Chitra Kada, it is the right information. Raghav, were you saying something? Okay. Krishna Dvaipayana. Okay, Krishna Dvaipayana is the official name of Vyasa. Vyasar is more of an adjective, right? Vyasar means, Vyasam means it's more elucidation or explanation. Vyasar means the person that does the elucidation, or the person that does the commentary, or the person that does the explanation, right? So technically speaking, there could be other people that are referred to as Vyasa also. The reason why Krishna Dvaipayana was referred to as Vyasa because he was the most prolific commentator, or he was the most prolific person that segregated the Vedas into 4 parts. Okay, we all know the 4 parts of Vedas. Can anybody say what they are? Yes, Rig, Yajus, Sama, and Atharvana Vedam, as we know it today, were actually segregated by none other than Krishna Dvaipayana, right? So he did that monumental task of segregating the Vedas. So that's why he was called as Veda Vyasa. Okay, so if you just think about the etymology or look at the origin of the word, it's more like an adjective. It's not the birth name of Vyasa. The birth name of Vyasa was Krishna Dvaipayana. So back in the day, all the names had a reason or a meaning behind their names, right? So each person had a name that pointed to a story or one of their exploits or one of the reasons or one of the occurrences when they were born that reminded the person of the trait of the name of the person or the story behind the name of the person. So in such fashion, Krishna Dvaipayana means Krishna meant black or dark skinned. Dvaipayana means born in an island. Dvipa means island, And being born in a Dvipa is called Dvaipayana. Okay, so the dark-skinned child that was born in an island is called island of what? Becomes a question, right? When you say island, island of what? It is the island of the river Yamuna, right? So Ganga Putra Bhishma, Bhishma was the child of Ganga, and Vyasar was a child of Yamuna. I will go ahead and connect these 2 points later on why we are talking about Bhishma and Vyasar in the same breath. But Vyasar is known as Ganga Putra Bhishma, while Bhishma is known as Ganga Putra Bhishma, and Vyasar is known as the son, almost correlated to being the son of Yamuna, because he was born on the island formed between the river Yamuna, right? So that's the reason why he got Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas, right? So when we talk about Dvipa, do you know what Dvipa where we are in right now, like the North American continent, what Dvipa it is called?
Krauncha Dvipa.
Wonderful, Raghav. So it's called Krauncha Dvipa. So every day morning when we say the Sankalpam, when we are doing the Tiruvaradhanam or any other activity, we say, Harihi Om Tati, we start saying that. And Krauncha Dvipe is the reference that we give to our current location, which is North America. One more question. What does India refer to? What Dvipam is India?
Jambu Dvipe.
Very nice. So Jambu Dvipam is the Indian Dvipa, which is the Indian subcontinent, Asian subcontinent rather, and the Indian, Sri Lanka and the other differences have originated recently. But back in the day, during when these Puranas were written, all of that was one big cluster of land ruled by a few kings, and is called as Jambu Dvipa, and Krauncha Dvipa is the North American subcontinent. Very nice. So having said that, we go into further detail about Maharishi Vedavyasa. So he was called Krishna Dvaipayana Vyas, and some references loosely also tie his name to being called as Badarayana. Okay, so there are many people. So when you go back in the Puranas, right, there are many individuals that exist with the same name. Okay, so it's very easy to confuse between them, but we know for fact that there is this Vedavyasar that is the compiler of the 4 Vedas, and that's the reason why he received his name as Vedavyasar, and he is technically called as Krishna Dvaipayana, right? He split them and compiled the Vedams into 4 forms. Okay, and when we talk about Vyasam, right, Vyas is the name of a commentator or a compiler or arranger, and there are about 29 different Vyasas that have been identified in Vishnu Purana. Okay, so does anybody know who narrated Vishnu Puranam to whom? There is a correlation to why I'm asking.
Matre Maharishi.
It's pretty close to our topic here. It's not Vedavyasar, I'll tell you that.
It's not Vedavyasar, but
It's Parashara.
Parashara to Matre Maharishi.
Yeah, so his disciple, that's what he was reciting. He was narrating. Yes, Parashara is Vedavyasar's father, and there is another correlation to our Samesri class on the importance of Parashara and Vedavyasar to the life of Ramanuja. Can anybody bring that out?
Parashara and Vedavyasar were the names that Yamunacharya wanted 2 children and 2 Vaishnava children to have, and so Ramanuja wanted to carry out that order, and so he told to one of his disciples, like Puratarva, and then he told him to name his kids Parasara and Vedavyasar.
Right. So what was that's very good. Excellent. Does anybody want to add a little more detail into how that occurred and when that occurred?
It occurred when he was about to like Paramapada.
What is that?
When he was about to Paramapada.
Yes. So let me just rephrase what you just said. So when Swami Alavandar is in his final moments, and he sends Periyanambihal to Kanchipuram in order to bring Swami Ramanuja, so Alavandar can pass the being the head of Sri Vaishnavism to Ramanuja officially. when that happens, apparently Ramanujar and Periyanambigal reach Srirangam, and they find that Alavandar has already gone to the divine abode, or he has already passed away. But they noticed that there were 3 fingers that Alavandar had stretched out on his chest. And there were reasons why there were 3 fingers that were stretched out. And one of the reasons was to bring about the importance of Maharishi Parasharar and Maharishi Vedavyasa. Okay, so when Ramanujar makes a promise to satisfy all of the 3 important steps that Alavandar wanted to fulfill, which was kind of alluding to the reason why he had 3 fingers open, when he made that promise by knowing that by performing dhyanam right next to Alavandar's Tirumeni or mortal remains, then his fingers automatically, I mean, he had 3 fingers closed in like that, and he didn't know what those 3 reasons were. And when Ramanujan actually made those promises, all those 3 fingers straighten out, as symbolically showing that Ramanujan actually nailed what the 3 promises that Alavandar was wanting from Ramanujan were, or what were the 3 things that Alavandar wanted Ramanujan to establish. Excuse me. So one of that was to popularize the name of Parashara and Vedavyasar because of their contribution to the Sampradaya, right? So if there was no Parashara, we would not have any Vishnu Puranam whatsoever, right? And if there was no Parashara, there would be no Vedavyasar, and we would not have the most sacred work of the Vasishtha, not just the Vasishtha Advaita Sampradayam, just of the eastern countries like India, the most greatest and sacred work of the Hindus, even you could say, which is, can anybody guess?
Vedam.
Yes, the meanings of Vedam, called as the Brahma Sutram, right? The Brahma Sutram is nothing but a compilation of the meaning of Vedams, which is formed as Brahma Sutram. And without Maharshi Vedavyasa, we wouldn't have Brahma Sutram. And if there was no Brahma Sutram, Swami Ramanujar couldn't have written the Sri Bhashyam, which was the commentary for Brahma Sutram in our Visishtadvaitam way, right? So back in the day, if there was supposed to be a particular Sampradayam to reach Perumal, it has to be conversant with the Vedam, or it has to fall into the logic of how Brahma Sutram is written, and that has to be decided by a cross-functional team of experts, not just belonging to Visishtadvaitam, but a cross-functional team of experts from all Siddhantams. They will have to review the commentary of the Vedams, which is the Brahma Sutram, and then accept that, yes, this Sampradayam is one of the ways where we can derive or reach Perumal per the Vedams. So Swami Ramanujar accomplished that, and that's why we have Sri Bhashyam, and Swami Ramanujar was referred to as Sri Bhashyakarar because of having written the commentary for Sri Bhashyam, and that's why the Hayagrivan was handed over by Saraswati Devi herself. After listening to Swami Ramanujar's commentary, she was so pleased that it was the right explanation for Brahma Sutram. And then as a mark of completion and appreciation for Swami Ramanujar, Saraswati Devi herself handed over the Lakshmi Hayagriva Murti in the hands of Swami Ramanujar, right? So all of this was because of the second promise that Ramanujar made in front of Alavandar's Tirumeni, and one such promise was to popularize Parashara and Vedavyasa because of these important texts and their contribution to the Sampradaya, right? So how did Swami Ramanujar end up accomplishing that? Swami Ramanujar was already a sannyasi by that period. So he couldn't marry or have children because he had already given up all of that, right? So he chose Kuratalwan for that activity. And when Kuratalwan had 2 children, 2 boys, one was named Parashara Bhattar and the second was named as Vyasa Bhattar. Okay, we all know the great stories and exploits of Parashara Bhattar and Vyasa Bhattar and their contributions to our Sampradayam also. I don't want to go too much and digress from our topic on hand, but even in our own Sampradayam, Alavandar and Swami Ramanujar, Swami Alavandar and Swami Ramanujar have passed on great respect for Parashara and Vedavyasar and had his names. And even now, I've heard in certain Kalakshepams that the descendants of Kuratalwan's Vamsham have to name once in 3 generations, the names of the male children have to be either Parashara or Vyasa for the descendants of Kuratalwan is one of the references I've heard in certain Kalakshepams also. So they still want to carry over the lineage, the names through their lineage in respect of Swami Ramanujar's order. So, the greatness of Parashara and Vedavyasar don't go away or don't get forgotten. Okay. Reason we are talking about Vedavyasar today is because he's the third in the list of Chiranjeevis. Okay. We'll go into slight detail on why and how he became a Chiranjeevi. Right. We saw that for certain people, it was not really a boon. Like for Ashwatthama, it was not a boon why he was made into Chiranjeevi. It was actually a curse. But in Vedavyasar's case, it was actually, we'll go into the detail on the story where how and when he became a Chiranjeevi. Okay, so that's how it starts. That's how the class starts here about Swami Vedavyasar, and a little bit of detail into how he compiled the Vedams before we go into his story. So Vedam was just one bulk of mantras, of songs, of procedures of performing the yajnas or prayogams of performing the yajnas. Can anybody name a few yajnas that you guys know from the Vedam?
Ashwamedha Yajnam or
Very nice.
Yajnam.
What is that?
Rajasuya Yajnam.
Rajasuya Yajnam, wonderful.
Panchamahayajnam.
What is that?
Panchamahayajnam.
Panchamahayajnam, okay. And then there is something called Satrayagam. There is called something called Mahagaruda Jainam, or there is something also called a Somayagam. And under Somayagam, there are different types of Somayagams called Vajapayam and different other yajnams. So all of those yajnams, right? How to make those yajnams? What are the procedures? They are very detailed procedures of how the Homakunda needs to be made, and how many people are supposed to be invited. What are the mantrams that are supposed to be chanted? What are the ahutis or what are the offerings that are supposed to be placed inside the sacrificial fire or the yajnam or the agni, or how the agni is supposed to be prepared? Very, very, very detailed procedures. So procedures of yajnam are also a part of Vedam. And also the practice of magic and prayogam for protecting the people that are performing such yajnams, and also protecting the temples and also the deities. Those procedures are also were a part of those yajnams. So Swami Vedavyasar compiled them into mantras. Mantras, the Purva mantras, are all residing in Rig Vedam. Rig Vedam is full of mantras, right? And Yajurvedam talks about the yajnams that we just briefly spoke about here. How the yajnams are performed, what are the yajnams and how they are supposed to be performed, what mantrams, what dhanams, what sacrifices, what ahutis, how many people, how big, how long, and how much, and all of the nitty-bitty details are documented in the mantra form in Yajurvedam, right? And then Samavedam obviously is Samagana, right? We have a few children that are Samavedis in our class. I know Raman is a Samavedi, Raghav is a Samavedi. They are very proficient in chanting particular Samavedams about particular topics. So those Samavedams are also referred to as Samaganams, right? So those have most of the mantrams that appear in Rig Vedam, but are sang in the meters of Samavedam. It is very difficult to be a Samavedi because in Yajurvedam you only have Udatam, Anudatam, Swaritam, and Dirgha Swaritam, maximum 4 swaras. But there are about 7 or 8 swaras. It's almost like a singing process, but it's very, 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 very mellifluous to hear. And obviously Perumal derives a lot of pleasure. Perumal is very happy listening to Samavedams and Samavedis chanting the Samavedams, right? So the songs that are basically mantras that appear in Rig and Yajus, but are chanted in a certain meter, which is almost, Samaganam, which is almost like music for Perumal. So those songs or those sung in the meter of Samavedams encompass the third Vedam or the Samavedam. Rig used to be Rig is all the mantrams, Yajurs is all the procedure to perform the yajnam, and third is the Samam, which is nothing but singing of the same mantras from Rig and Yajus. And the fourth, the Atharvana Vedam, was supposed to be the procedures to protect the people performing the yajnam, deities, perimals, and temples, and all of that using magic and certain prayogams. Okay, so that formed the fourth or the Atharvana Veda, right? So generally, when people used to say how those four were segregated was because Perumal, see, the goal of the Vedam is to please Perumal, right? Is to know who is Perumal and to please Perumal, and finally to attain Perumal at the end of our lives. That's what the goal of Vedam is, right? So mantrams define Perumal, right? Perumal is also referred in the form of mantrams, and how we can chant the mantrams about each Perumal, which is what is Rigvedam. Once you define Perumal, then you have to offer ablutions for Perumal or offer offerings for Perumal through yajna, right? You have to offer sacrifices for Perumal or to offer offerings for Perumal through yajna or through Agni, which is contained in Yajurvedam. So you know Perumal, and now you have offered ahutis for Perumal. Now the offered ahutis for Perumal, the next step is to please Perumal by songs, right? By singing the same hymns in the form of Samavedam, that Perumal that you have defined and offered ahutis is now pleased with the singing of the songs. And the fourth and the last Atharvana Vedam is the way to protect the person that performs all of this by performing, by instructing people on prayogams of magic and other occult ways of protecting and safeguarding the yajna kundam, the people performing the yajna Perumal, and the temples and the other appendages of the yajna. Okay, so this is a small brief note about how Vyasar segregated the Vedams, and how did he hand it over to the rishis. So Paila was a rishi that received one of Vyasar's disciple was Paila, and he received the Rigvedam, and Vaishampayana received the Yajurvedam, Jaimini received Samavedam, and Sumantu received the Atharvana Vedam. One more person, which was Shuka Brahman, that was the direct descendant of Vyasar. He also knew about the truth of all the Vedams, and he also knew about all of the Saramsam of the Vedams and how they were segregated and handed over to Paila, Vaishampayana, Jaimini, and Sumantu. Okay, with that, Vyasar decided those Maharishis to pass the knowledge of the Vedams through their disciples. Okay, to make Rig, Yajur, Sama, and Atharvana. So because it was very difficult for one person to do all of it, so he said, your descendants will, Paila's descendants will do Rigvedam, Vaishampayana's descendant will do Yajur, Jaimini's descendant will do Samam, and Sumanto's descendant will do Atharvana. It doesn't mean that the other group of people shouldn't read, the other group of people from Rig shouldn't read the other three. It is very important that you finish your Vedam first. For example, I belong to Yajurvedam. So if I want to chant Samavedam or Rigvedam or Atharvana Vedam, I should make sure that I finish Yajurvedam first. And then I go to Samavedam, Atharvana Vedam, or Rigvedam, right? So what does that ensure? That ensures that the Yajurvedam in my generation gets passed over to the next generation. And if I had additional time and if I had additional intellectual power to read the other Vedams, yes, obviously I could do that, right? So that was the purpose behind Vyasar doing this. So the Vedams can be handed over to the next generation without breaking. And you can see after several thousands and thousands of years, the Vedams are still preferred. A lot of it have been lost, but there is quite a bit of the Vedams that have been preserved and that is being handed over generation after generation, right? So that's a small introduction to the Vedams as segregated by Maharishi Vyasar. Okay, so now let's go and talk about Parasharar, Maharishi Parasharar, and Satyavati, right? Satyavati, who is Satyavati? Yes, Krishna Dvaipayana's mother is Satyavati. So let's talk about how Maharishi Vyasar was born. We just saw that Vasishta's son was Shakti, and Shakti's son is Maharishi Parasharar, and Parasharar was brought up by none other than Vasishta himself, right? So Vasishta's son Parasharar, once upon a time, was visiting a king of fishermen called Dasharaja, and he wanted to cross the river Yamuna, right? So once he wanted to cross the river Yamuna, he wanted to get on a boat to go across, and the boat was actually being driven by a fisherwoman. Okay, that fisherwoman was none other than Dasharaja's adopted daughter. So listen to me carefully. She was not the biological daughter, but the adopted daughter of Dasharaja, or the fisher king, right? So Maharishi Parasharar goes on the boat, and she sees that a woman is driving the boat, and he says, you know what, can you bring somebody else to drive the boat? So I need to go across across Yamuna to the other side of the river. And Satyavati says, don't worry, great Maharshi, even though I am a woman, I am strong enough to move the boat and get you to the other side. Doesn't matter even if 1,000 Maharshis or 1,000 other people want to come, I can still manage the boat and get you on the other side. And that her father is the King Dasharaja, and she safely starts transporting Maharishi on the boat. So Maharishi Parashara is very impressed by Satyavati's skill in which she is driving the boat. And keep in mind, Satyavati is also extremely beautiful, right? But the one problem with Satyavati was that she was smelling like a fish all the time. So she was almost called as Matsya Gandha. Matsya means fish, Gandha means smell. So one of the names that Satyavati went by was Matsya Gandha. To be honest, Matsya Gandha was actually her natural name because of her smell of a fish, right? So Satyavati very carefully and respectfully and takes Parashara through the river Yamuna. Okay, while going through the river Yamuna, sage Parashara is a great astrologer also. He looks at the sky and he looks at the formation of the stars in the sky, and he decides that if he had a son or if he had a child at that time, that child will end up being the greatest Maharishi of all times and will be the most prolific and valorous and most knowledgeable and most respected person to be ever on the earth as a Maharishi, and would also be an incarnation of Mahavishnu, and he would be the great compiler of many sacred texts. And Parashara decides that this is the time that he should have a child. And when he is riding the boat, there is none other than Matsya Gandha, who is on the boat, who also happens to be very beautiful. And the only problem with her was she smelled of a fish. So he says to Satyavati, and he says that this is the time. This is one of the greatest times ever, where if the child is born in this time, then he's going to be a Chiranjeevi, and he's going to be the incarnation of Mahavishnu. He's so great. He's going to be so great that you can't even think about it. He's what he says, and then Satyavati says, okay, fine, and she and Maharishi Parashara go on to an island. This is the Dvipa. This is the Dvipa in the river Yamuna, where Maharishi Vyasar was born to Satyavati or to Matsya Gandha and Parashara. So once Matsya Gandha gives birth to Vyasar, Maharishi Parashara is very happy and wants to bless Satyavati, and he says, from today onwards, the smell of fish that is coming from her body will no longer be there, and she will start smelling of purity due to her truthfulness and her respectfulness towards Parashara. And that is why her name becomes Satyavati, or the lady with a pure fragrance of truth coming from her body instead of a fish's fragrance. Parashara also blesses Satyavati with being eternally young forever, right? Eternally young, and also blesses that the son that is born at that time that Parashara had plotted would end up being the greatest of the rishis, like Parashara himself, or even better. So he blesses that and he moves on. So Krishna Dvaipayana was born in the island between the river Yamuna for Satyavati / Matsya Gandha and Parashara. Okay, and once the baby is born, he starts growing really fast. He starts growing really fast because of the blessings of Parashara, and he very quickly becomes Maharishi Vyasar, Maharishi Krishna Dvaipayana, not Vyasar yet, because he did not segregate the Vedas yet. So he becomes Krishna Dvaipayana, and he wants to go along with Parashara in order to do penance in the forest. Okay, so he wants to go to the forest and do penance, and Satyavati is so upset because Maharishi Veda Krishna Dvaipayana at this point is one of the doting child. He's the doting child of Satyavati, but he also wants to leave for the forest to do penance. But Krishna Dvaipayana says, you know what, mother, whenever you think of me, or whenever Satyavati thinks of Veda Vyasa, and she wants his support or she wants his help, the next moment that Veda Vyasa will come and appear in front of Satyavati, the moment she thinks of him is the promise that Veda Vyasa gives to Satyavati. So one other thing you have to keep in mind, children, at this point is that any great person, be it a Maharishi or be it an avataram or be it a king or a great person, always respect their parents, and they always respect their mother very, very much. So you have to be really, really nice to your parents, and you have to be really nice to your mother, and whatever they want, whatever their wish is, and whatever they want you to do is all for your good. You should realize that and take it as a moral from Veda Vyasar's story, that he promised to appear in front of Satyavati whenever she wanted him or whenever she wanted his help. Okay, and he says that, and he goes away to perform tapas into the forest. Okay, so now let's just circle back to Parashara, and we will find out what his contributions to the Sampradayam were. Like I mentioned already, there is something called Parashara Smriti. Parashara Smriti is one of the Dharma Samhitas. It talks about all of the Dharma to be performed during the Dwapara and Kali Yugas. Like Dharma means excuse me, Dharma means like the duties, the roles and duties of every person in a society for peaceful and harmonious living, and also to live a very fulfilled and satisfied life, and finally to go and merge with Parimal when the time comes, when the relevant time comes, to go and merge with Parimal in order, and also to be a healthy and a very satisfied and a good contribution to the society, to help all of the people and citizens on how to conduct yourself is basis of Dharma, right? So all the Vaidika principles that we are doing right now in the form of Sandhya Vandanam, or in the form of Tiruvaradhanam, or in the form of chanting Vedams, or in the form of doing different activities prescribed by our Dharma, is actually based on the broad tenets that have been classified as the Dharma for each of the person's duties, and those are laid out by Parashara in Parashara Samhita, right? It's called basically the code of laws in order for everybody to exist, peacefully, happily, and to lead a satisfied life. So the second thing, obviously, we know the Vishnu Puranam was narrated by none other than sage Parashara himself. And then the third important thing is the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. So, like I said, Parashara was a great astrologer, right? He was able to look at the stars on the sky and say that the child that will be born during that time will be a Chiranjeevi, and will be also an incarnation of Parimal himself, and he'll be so great. So he'll be so great. So he'll be so great. So he already knew too much about the Parashara Hora Shastra, right? Brihat Parashara Hora Shastra. So he was an astrologer, and even today, I personally have instances where if there is any confusion about the importance or some rules in astrology, we refer back to the Brihat Parashara Hora Shastram written by Maharishi Parashara. Okay, so he was also an astrologer, so he gave the Hora Shastram to us, and then Vriksha Ayurveda is the other text on botany, right? Botany is the study of the trees, on the study of the trees, and text about medicines from trees for different ailments and different diseases, on what trees and what leaves and what roots and how they have to be prepared. And Vriksha Ayurvedam was also another grantham written by Parashara himself. And the last but not the least was the Krishi Parasharam, is the knowledge of agricultural practices that people need to adopt in order to have a successful life as a farmer. Okay, so that was also written by it was also written by Swami Parashara Maharishi, right? Parashara Samhita, Vishnu Puranam, Brihat Parashara Horashastram, Vriksha Ayurvedam, and Krishi Parasharam are the contributions of sage Parashara. Okay, so that's the brief introduction about Parashara himself, and then we'll talk about Satyavati a little bit, because life of Swami Veda Vyasar revolves around Satyavati quite a bit, because it's his mother, and she is also now, Parashara has moved on, and Satyavati has also moved on, and what to tell you, Veda Vyasar has left to the forest, and this is about the time when Shantanu, okay, the king of Hastinapuram and the father of Bhishma Pitamaha, comes about hunting in the forest, right? Bhishma was the son of Ganga, and then Bhishma is already, you might know the story about how Shantanu and Ganga got married, and there was a promise made by Shantanu to Ganga that he would not question any of the activities that Ganga was doing, and the children, the earlier children of Shantanu, were all thrown in the river Ganga and killed by Ganga herself, and the last child, when Ganga was going to drop in the river, Shantanu stops her and asks, like, what are you doing? Why are you throwing all the children into the river? Ganga says, I told you not to ask any questions about anything I'm doing. Since now that you asked, I have no other choice other than to leave you. And she hands over that child to Shantanu, and that's none other than Bhishma himself. So she takes that child along with her and then gives it back to Shantanu a little later, but that child is none other than Bhishma himself, right? So that Shantanu is now going to the forest for hunting, and because of Parashara's boon to Satyavati, she's already smelling of a great, great fragrance from long distances. People can smell the great fragrance emanating from her body, and obviously Shantanu is extremely pleased with that, and he wants to marry Satyavati. Shantanu wants to marry Satyavati, but then the Dasharaja, the fisherman king, says, you already have a child, or you already have a son called Bhishma. Now, if you go and marry my daughter Satyavati, then the child that is born from Satyavati is not going to be the king, and she is going to be second rung in the family, and I want her to be a queen, or the father or the mother of a king. And since you already have Bhishma, Satyavati is not going to be given to you in marriage, because she'll just be in some corner somewhere, and I want her to be queen. And Santanu comes back really upset because Bhishma is his favorite son, right? And he doesn't want to do anything bad for Bhishma. And then he comes back really sad that he cannot marry Satyavati. And Bhishma somehow finds out about this. And Bhishma says, well, if it's for my father to be happy that I should not be king, so be it. And he gives up, saying that he will not be the king of Hastinapura, or he will not be the next king of Hastinapura, in order to satisfy Shantanu's happiness to marry Satyavati. So he goes back to the forest and says, now Bhishma already promised that he won't be king. Are you guys okay to give Satyavati in marriage to me? And then Dasharaja says, no, not really. It's not enough if Bhishma doesn't be king. What if Bhishma gets married and he has a son and he becomes king? And then Satyavati will be in the corner of the room again, and she won't have any prominence. And then Shantanu is like, what? I'm already upset that Bhishma is not going to be king, and now you still want him not to marry? That is too much. This is not fair. And he's so upset, and he goes back, and he doesn't sleep for days and doesn't have food. And Bhishma somehow gets wind of this. He comes out, he comes out and he says, guess what? You don't want me to be king? Fine. You don't want my child to be king? Don't even worry about it. He says he is willing to sacrifice everything for his father, Shantanu. And he says at that point that he will never marry anybody. So only if he marries, he will have a child. And only if he has a child, then this question of the succession of the throne will come. So he says, guess what? I am not going to marry anybody, neither am I going to be king myself. So is that enough? And that big promise that he made for Shantanu got the name Bhishma, right? So Bhishma is the name he received because of the fierce promise that he made to remain a brahmachari for all his life, simply to satisfy his father. Okay, Shantanu becomes extremely sad and upset, but on a certain side, he feels happy about that he's going to marry Satyavati, and then he blesses Bhishma to say that Bhishma cannot be killed by anybody unless Bhishma wishes to die. He will not die, or the soul will not depart his body until Bhishma wishes to do so. So that's the wish that Santanu gives Bhishma because of the great sacrifice that Bhishma made. Okay, so let's go really fast and cover a little more topic here, because I think it's already 4:50, 10 more minutes left. Do you guys have any questions so far? Or is it just too much of dry stories that I'm saying? Or can I ask you a story? Can anybody name who was the grandfather of Veda Vyasar?
Shakti.
Very nice. And who was the father of Veda Vyasar?
Parasar.
The grandfather of Veda Vyasar or great grandfather of Veda Vyasar?
Vasishta.
Vasishta. Who's the son of Veda Vyasar?
Shuka Brahman.
Okay. If you don't remember this, if you know Sahasranamam, then you can know this. Vyasam Vasishta Naptaram Shaktehe Pautram Akalmasham Parasharatmajam Mande Shukatatam Taponidhim. So if you remember this slokam, you can get all of this. Okay. And then what is the other name for Veda Vyasar? Does anybody know?
Krishna Dvaipayana.
Krishna Dvaipayana. And who is the mother of Veda Vyasar?
Satyavati or Matsya Gandha.
Matsya Gandha. Very nice. Matsya Gandha or Satyavati, and father is apparently Parashara. Okay, so that's good. So let me circle back and cover a little more topic. So now we know how Veda Vyasa became Chiranjeevi, right? Because of Parashara picking the right time to have the child with Satyavati, and because of that, and then now Gangaputra Bhishma is born to Shantanu and Ganga. Veda Vyasar is born to Satyavati and Parashara. Okay, so since Satyavati is the wife of Shantanu, or the second wife of Shantanu, Veda Vyasar is kind of the stepchild of Shantanu. He is the direct descendant of Parashara, but the stepchild of Shantanu. There is a reason why I am mentioning this. So now Bhishma has made his promise, and Shantanu has gotten married to Satyavati. So that's done. So Satyavati is the wife of Shantanu, and Satyavati's other child is Veda Vyasa. And between Shantanu and Satyavati, there are two children that were born. Okay, the children were called as Vichitra Viryan and Chitrangadam. Those were not really strong prince kids. They were like a little bit weak, and they passed away at a young age. Okay, so if you have to technically classify Veda Vyasa, you could say Vichitra Viryan, Chitrangadan, and Veda Vyasa were brothers, right? Because all three of them were born to Satyavati. Veda Vyasa was born Parashara and Satyavati. Vichitra Viryan and Chitrangadan was born Shantanu and Satyavati, right? So now Vichitra Viryan and Chitrangadan were married to Ambika and Ambalika, right? Ambika and Ambalika were the wife of Vichitra Viryan and Chitrangadan respectively. Since Vichitra Viryan and Chitrangadan both died at a young age, meaning they didn't have any children at the time of their death, the Hastinapur dynasty was in a crisis. You could ask me, well, Bhishma was still alive. Bhishma could become king. But guess what? Can anybody say why is the crisis? Why Bhishma can't be king?
He made a promise.
Yes. So he made a promise to Satyavati that neither will he be king, nor will he marry anybody and get a son that will be king. Now, Satyavati herself wants Bhishma to be king because both of her children, Vichitra Virya and Chitrangada, have died without giving birth to their sons. And obviously, Vyasar is a hermit. He's a sage. He's a saint. He has given up everything and gone to the forest. He's not going to be king. So now the only person or the only male left after Shantanu is Bhishma himself, and there is nobody else. So since Satyavati is the queen or the Rajamata, she wants somebody to be king. She is explaining that a kingdom without a king will make the citizens feel very insecure and will make the other kings around attack the country and take everything away. So it's not a good thing to have a country without a king. So she is asking Bhishma to be king. But Bhishma says, no way. I have made my promise. Neither will I be king, nor will I marry anybody that will be giving birth to a son that can be king. So forget about me, think of something else. And then Satyavati at that moment thinks of Vedavyasa. Guess what? The promise that Maharshi Vedavyasa made, that Satyavati, whenever she thought about Vyasar, that he will show up, comes in, and Maharshi Vedavyasa, due to his Jnana Drishti, is able to realize that his mother is in crisis and he has to help out. So he shows up in front of Satyavati and he falls in her feet and takes her blessings and says, how can I help you, mother? And then Satyavati explains everything that happened, that says, you know what, Vichitravirya and Chitrangada married Ambika and Ambalika, but they passed away without having any children. Now the whole Hastinapura is in crisis because of succession. There is nobody to take up the kingdom. So you have to somehow find a way to get children or to help find a successor for the throne. And since Vedavyasa said he needed 1 year's time for him to decide about what to do, Satyavati says, no, there is not enough time because a country cannot be without a king. And she suggests that Vedavyasa marries Ambika and Ambalika in order to give birth to children. Okay, Vedavyasa is not happy about it at all because he's a saint. He has given up everything. He's gone to the forest. He's a very dark-skinned, bearded, terrible-looking, bad-smelling rishi. Because back in the day, rishis sat in penance for days and years together. Okay, and they had different ways of purifying themselves. They did not have the regular bath that people would have. They did not shave properly, so they looked smart. They did not have the skin nourishments or different things, and they would starve for days and days together. So they didn't really care about their external appearance. All they cared about was how their soul was and how they could contribute to the society and how they could make or enrich the life of other citizens or help others during their time on this earth. So they never paid attention to how they looked, and so he was, talking in layman terms. If you were supposed to look from the eyes of Ambika and Ambalika, that Satyavati wanted Vedavyasa to marry, they were princesses, right? They were used to dressing up, looking great, very beautiful princesses, obviously, laid in comfort and everything. So from their perspective, or from a layman's perspective, or a family man's perspective, Vedavyasa was not in any way a very handsome or a very pleasing man from a marriage perspective. Obviously, from a knowledge perspective and from his Atmagunam perspective and his greatness perspective, he was the best. Okay, but he was a very, very, like I said, very dark-skinned person, because you already know he was called Krishna Dvaipayana, right? So hot skin, and he had big locks of beard and big, jatamudi, you would say, a big lump of hair on top, and a lot of hair, flowing from his back, and big, braids of beard hanging from his face, and he wasn't the best person in terms of handsomeness, if that were to be considered. But Satyavati said, no, this is not about any of that. This is about the crisis that has taken up the Hastinapura dynasty, and somehow you have to step in to make a legal heir or a legal successor for the Hastinapura dynasty, and so you should help out. So because of Satyavati's insistence, Vedavyasa agrees to help out in order to get a successor for the Hastinapura dynasty. So now Ambika, who's apparently a very beautiful princess, or queen at that point, because Vichitravidya and Chitrangada are dead, and they were supposed to be the son of Shantanu, and they were the princesses, not the queens yet. They were very beautiful, and they were used to a lot of comforts of the kingdom. So when they looked at Vedavyasar, for a moment, Ambika actually shut her eyes. It was such a glaring sight. She was so shocked to look at a person like Vedavyasar. And she was like so shocked that she closed her eyes. So the child that Vedavyasar blessed Ambika with ended up being blind. Can anybody guess the name of that child?
Dhritarashtra.
There you go. Very nice. Dhritarashtra is the name of the child that ended up being blind, which was the son of Ambika. Right? Ambalika, actually, when she looked at Vedavyasa, she was so shocked at his appearance that she turned pale and sick. That's how shocked she was. They did not have the maturity to look beyond the external appearance and to look at the internal beauty or the greatness, because by that time, Vedavyasa had already segregated the Vedas, and he was very popular in Bharatavarsha as the Vedavyasa, the Maharishi Vedavyasa. So they did not have that maturity to absorb that fact. And Ambalika turned pale looking at Vedavyasa because of his strikingly bearded, dark appearance. And because she turned pale, the child that was blessed for Ambalika was also pale and a little bit sick. Can anybody name that child? Pandu. There you go. Okay. And then there was also a maid that came along with Ambika and Ambalika that was not shocked at all. Even though she was a maid servant of Vichitravidya and Chitrangada, Ambika and Ambalika, she was not shocked. She realized the greatness of Vedavyasa. And Vedavyasa blessed her also with a child, and his name was Vidura. He was very, very pleased with that maid servant, and he said that he blessed her and said she will no longer be a maid servant, and that her son that will be born to her, and Vedavyasa, will be one of the most virtuous persons. And he turns out to be a minister in Dhritarashtra's court because of being the son of Vedavyasa, right? So he is very close. Vedavyasa considered himself very close to Vidura, more than Dhritarashtra and Pandu. Okay, so now you know the importance of Vedavyasa in the Mahabharata epic, right? Vedavyasa obviously wrote the Brahma Sutram, and he also wrote the great epic called Mahabharatam, and he compiled the Puranas, all the 18 Puranas. If you are a part of the SAM-SV class, we are going through the Puranas right now, particularly in Bhagavata Purana now. That is the beauty of his contributions, and those 18 major Puranas were all compiled by Maharshi Vedavyasa. And one other thing, for the people that think Mahabharata may be the imagination of Vedavyasa, here is the point that proves that it is not. Because Vedavyasa is very closely linked to these happenings, and he has been physically present for every one of the steps that are happening in Mahabharata. So, and the accurate depiction of the details where he has been present already proves to us that it is not mere imagination of Vedavyasa, because unless you are present there personally, and you capture whatever is happening with such level of great detail, it's almost mind-boggling to even think that it might be imagination. It is not, because Vedavyasa himself was present during every one of those steps when things were happening. For example, Vedavyasa was very sympathetic towards Pandavas more than Kauravas. Even though Dhritarashtra and Pandu and Vidura were his own children, he was very sympathetic towards Pandavas because the Kauravas tried to burn the the palace in which they were going to stay while on their way to Kandava Prastham, right? So after that, Vedavyasa already knows that this is not going to end easily, and that Kauravas are in the path of adharma, and Pandavas are the people that are in the path of dharma. And when Vedavyasa when they set up the kingdom in Kandava Prastham, or they converted to Indra Prastham, and Yudhishthira is trying to construct the kingdom there, Vyasa is present there to chant the mantras in order to help him build the country and also for all the good things to happen. And then when Yudhishthira is performing all the yajnas like the Rajasuya yajna and all the different yajnas, Vyasa was really there. And also when during their Ajñatavas, when the Pandavas go to the Panchala and Arjuna wins over Draupadi, and the verdict from Kunti is for all the 5 brothers to share whatever that was brought, which means all the 5 brothers should share or marry Panchali or Draupadi. Vyasar is the person that comes up and convinces everybody for that arrangement to happen. When Drishtadyumna and Drupada, the brother and the father of Draupadi, are convinced by none other than Vyasar himself that she can be married to the Panchapandavas. And when Shishupala Vadam, when Perumal takes over the Sudarshana Chakram and chops off Shishupala's head, Vyasar is present there as well, right? So he was present in all of the instances, major instances of Mahabharata, which tells us that him writing Mahabharata is not any form of imagination whatsoever. It is all real happenings that he has captured in the great Grantham called Mahabharata. And he is also a very famous propounder of the ideas of war not being the solution for a king, right? A king has to protect his interests, and he also needs to grow his country. So what does it mean by growing country? Is to attack the other country, defeat the king and taking over? No. Vyasar was saying a king is great only when he is wise and diplomatic, and he makes maneuvers to convert his enemies into friends or take over the land that is occupied by the neighbors to become his own land, not by war or bloodshed. So most of his teachings are also captured in Chanakya's Arthashastra on how a king should conduct himself wisely and diplomatically, right? So these are some of the interesting topics about Maharishi Vyasar. And you know what? I'm not even sure if I made justice to the topic, but this is some of the brief instances and information I could provide about Vyasar. Guys, you can go ahead and ask me any question if you want on topic. I can answer if I know, otherwise I'll find it out for you. Any questions? Stavyan, Samvrat, Aparajitan, Raghav, Vasmati, Saumi. I know a few of the people are actually watching it in YouTube, so that's fine too. But if you can also go, like and subscribe to the Sam Ahobilamat link for the story session, you would that would benefit you to keep these things remembered and then review them when you get a chance as well. If you guys have no other questions, then I'll ask you a few questions from the topic I covered after 4:50. So you can answer a few questions. So can anybody compare and contrast between Bhishma and Vyasa?
Bhishma is Ganga's son, and while Vyasa is actually practically he is Yamuna's son.
Okay, was born in the Dvipa of Yamuna. Anything else?
Also, Bhishma is more like a Kshatriyan, he in the manner that he fights war. But Vyasa is like a sage who would do penance and stuff.
Okay. One more interesting point.
Vyasa is a Chiranjeevi while Bhishma is not.
Okay. One more point.
Well, can I do comparing or only contrasting?
Do whatever you want, man. Just getting the points together.
You're
already doing great.
They both got boons that made them live longer.
Mm-hmm.
They're both brothers. Well, half brothers.
Half brothers, yeah.
Um,
They were both born one way or the other to either Shantanu or Satyavati, but neither of them ended up being a king. Neither Vyasar was a king nor Bhishma was a king. Right?
Yeah.
Anything else? So between Satyavati, Bhishma, and Vyasar, those are the three people that were key in reviving the Hastinapura's lineage. Right? Because not just Vichitra Vidya and Chitrangada's early expiry, but also Kunti gave birth to 5 children in the forest along with Pandu, and Pandu passed away right after the birth of the 5th child. Right? So when Yudhishthira comes back, Yudhishthira is about 16 years old. And going back when Kunti was pregnant, Gandhari was also pregnant. But Kunti delivered kids sooner than Gandhari. So Gandhari became a little bit jealous. And all of that bad thoughts and whatever resulted in Gandhari giving birth to a big, hard, muscular lump of flesh instead of children. So again, since Pandu and Kunti were in the forest, Vyasar shows up at the thought of Satyavati, and he asks for 100 pots, and he puts that hard, muscular ball of flesh into 100 pots, and then after a year's time, they open up to get the 100 Kauravas. Right? So that's another instance when Vyasar comes and protects the lineage. And there are many, many more instances, like Yudhishthira is mad when Ghatotkacha was killed, that he takes his bow and arrow and spear and goes to fight Bhishma and Drona and others, where Vyasar kind of pacifies him, consoles him to say, in order to protect Arjuna, it was like a strategic war strategy to sacrifice Ghatotkacha, because if Ghatotkacha lived and Arjuna died, the war would have gotten over a lot sooner, because Krishna and Arjuna were the people that actually made sure the war was won. So he convinces Yudhishthira to say the sacrifice of Ghatotkacha was required to protect Arjuna. And that's the reason why, and many instances like that, where Vyasar comes and occupies limelight and also gives his knowledge in order to protect the Hastinapura dynasty and also the Pandavas and Kauravas. Right? And he passed over the knowledge and the literary works that he completed also are of immense importance even today, including Visishtadvaita Sampradaya in terms of Brahma Sutra. When you guys grow up and you get a Sadacharyan, and when you enjoy the words of Swami Ramanujar, and you would also need to learn a little bit of Vedas, Veda Bhashyams, and Sanskrit grammar in order to go and understand the details of Brahma Sutra, you'll really enjoy the meaning. It's just intellectual bliss when you just read through them. I wish when you guys grow up, you actually get a chance to do that, and I'm sure you will, because you guys are really sharp, top of the cream kids. But I definitely say it's one of the greatest works in our country back in India, and it's a huge contribution to the world, I would even say. The level of intellectual analysis that goes into each one of those sutrams and how they explain it as the essence of Vedas. It's you cannot just describe it with words. It's so nice. So anyhow, if that's it, we are 30 minutes over. Let's chant Acharya Taniyan and wrap up the class for today. And I will continue on my sessions further. So today was Maharishi Vyasar, Ashwatthama, Bali, Vyasar. Next will be Hanuman, Vibhishanar, Kripar, Parashurama. 4 more left. And I hope to do that a little more faster than this. But that will be my scope of narration in my following classes. Okay? So let's chant Acharya Taniyan, Srimat Rangashatari Sambha, Vivaral Labdhagamanta Dvayam, Srimat Vira Hutvahat, Yadjit Padar, Indashrayam, Srimat Veda Vadam Sadeshike, Dehe Karunya Vikshaspadam, Seve Rangadhurina Shasana, Vasam Narayanam Yoginam. You want to say? Vedanta, Deshika, Yatindra, Kataksha, Labda, Vayanta Saram, Anavadyam, Gunam Budabhyam, Narayanatya, Ititurya, Kripa, Abhishiktam, Sri Ranganatha, Itishekara Mashraya Maha, Shrimadesh Lakshmin Sundhi Valga, Sevaka Shivan Shragovashri, Narayan Yatindra Mahadeshikaya Maha, Shrimadesh Shivan Shragovashri, Ranganath Yatindra Maha.